So as already said, my name is Steve Jacobs. I'm the deputy editor here at Street Fight. And you know, I pretty much always get stuck with the post-lunch shift, but today it really doesn't matter because I'm going to present an idea that really represents the culmination of a lot of my work here at Street Fight. And it deals with this question that I've sort of obsessed with for the past few years. And it's one that I presented on before when I presented on in San Francisco, which is, in an increasingly virtual age, what will the physical marketplace look like? How will we buy, how will we sell, how will we interact in our physical communities? So it's something I'm fairly optimistic about, largely because over the past century, what we have kind of sucks. I look at our marketplaces here in the US, and I think something went really wrong. We have a handful of brands replicated across the country with little awareness to the demographic or social nuances of each community. It's a failure not only in a waste of resources, but really in the ability to provide the right product to the right consumer, right? The model asks consumers to sort of lay up, to take a mediocre something because it's cheaper and it's available. Click. So what we've seen over the last, I'd say, 70 years, pretty much since the post-war period, has been what I want to call the brand era, right? It's one product with one message for one consumer. And what I want to present to you today is an argument about why we're nearing an end to that era. I'm going to explain how the economies of scale that sustain large brands are mainly disintegrating, and how new technologies will help small businesses thrive in predominantly local industries that we think of, so retail, somewhat, but mainly like food service and other service industries. So I want to make it clear that I see this as a direct extension of the democratization that's already happened in information businesses, that's happened in video, and particularly news media, an innovation that's let a company like Street Fight exist. So to understand this change of business models over time, I wanted to first kind of offer a universal framework, a way to understand business outside of change. So I looked at a franchise agreement, and I kind of came up with this 8-layer stack. And it's everything from coming up with a business, growing it, running it, and continuing to grow it. So the idea is, click. Capital provides the foundation, which buys resources. Training and education kind of helps turn those resources into a product. And then marketing and advertising helps take that product and communicate it to consumers, thus reinforcing brand. So each layer of the stack is sort of a critical component, but over time, we see that certain layers become more important. And I'm going to call this the scale layer. It simply means that in that given context, in that technological and business context of the day, that layer thrives with scale. Early on, it was with capital. Then in the 19th century, we saw the Industrial Revolution, in which the more you manufactured, the more profitable you became. Most recently, it was all about brand. Pretty much since the war, it's been big brands that have dominated the marketplace. So quickly, I want to define brand because I think this is important. Brand is not the product. It's the consumer's perception of the product. And so when we think about perception, when we think about brand, it essentially has two functions, right? One is, on the one hand, brand shapes kind of the way we think about a product, right? It's sort of the Don Draper effect. For McDonald's, when we eat a cheeseburger, we know we're loving it. But kind of before that, there's a more fundamental problem that brands solved in the late 20th century. And that was a very basic information problem, and here it is. As we started to work, live, and relax in different places, as people commuted into cities, and as families, we used air travel to fly across the country, we became national and regional consumers. And that meant we were spending money in places which we didn't know very well. So a strong brand not only shaped the way we thought about product, it allowed consumers to trust a business before ever entering it. It was the Yelp of its age. If we saw the Golden Arches driving down 95, we knew exactly what to expect. So brand was so effective in solving that information problem, in helping us navigate both the more complex and geographically diverse consumer experience that we were having, that the rest of the business stack sort of fell in line, right? It was, in its day, that scale layer that I discussed earlier. So, remember, the value of brand was all in its consistency. It was our ability to anticipate what the product was. That meant a burger that was made in Maine was made in the exact same way as Nebraska. Same with messaging, right? It was one message, a nation's conversation for a nation's product. So I've already explained that our transients, right? The growth of a national consumer helped feed the appetite for larger brands. But there needed to be that enabling technology, and what that really was were these centralized networks. Brand could never have existed without television, without the ability to reach a national audience and with relative ease. But technology is obviously changing. And that information problem, right, the ability to know a product before trying it, is being solved in brand new ways. Primarily by the internet. So what peer-to-peer structures allow us to do is communicate with one another. So instead of relying on a newspaper for a product review, and there's only a handful of reviews they can produce each month, we rely on our neighbors to give us news through social media, and our past patrons to tell us about a restaurant. And what that does is expands the number of people who can contribute information, thus exploding the amount of local information that exists. Companies such as Yelp and Google have created these platforms, which have amassed an enormous amount of information about nearly every business in the United States. The impact of that explosion is dramatic. The ability for a consumer to look up reviews reduces the barrier to entry into the local market by making it easier for consumers to try businesses with whom they have no relationship. And so the search business and the brand business are fundamentally intertwined. The growth of the local search business represents a fundamental unbundling of the brand model. As Yelp grows, McDonald's becomes stronger. So what does this mean? Here's the rub. Last year, Itamar Simonson, one of the foremost experts on consumer decisioning, guy who wrote a book in the 80s basically saying that brand controlled everything, wrote a book last year saying that brand, for the most part, is not going to matter as much, that the value of brand is quickly eroding. Now, I only have a bit of time here, but it's important to realize that the decline of brand is only one part of the stack. But we've also seen democratization in other parts of the business stack. Consider media. Consider the way we buy marketing. Before we bought networks, now we're buying audience. Programmatic, that's buying just the individuals you want using data. It's going to represent 42% of digital media spending by 2017. That's massive. More importantly, customized production. This is something that folks have really been waiting for, but it's just the ability to, instead of producing inventory and have consumers choose which one they'd like, have consumers tell you what they want and build it for them. This is a model that could never exist because the marginal cost of producing one product always decreased in the Industrial Revolution as you got larger and larger. Tesla, for instance, they don't have inventory. Someone comes in, they design a car, and they deliver it 2 weeks later. Yes, that's a boon for consumers, but it's also a boon for Tesla. They don't have to deal with the liability of inventory. So, what's next? And this really is the point of here. So, let's quickly step back a moment. We know that the explosion of local information has dramatically reduced the value of brand as a solution to the information problem. In lockstep with this, we're also seeing technology allowing for more customized and lower scale production. So what's next? I really look online, because again, I see this as an extension of what we're already seeing in information businesses. And what's happened is that instead of having companies that produce products, that are brands, we see platforms that help others produce them. Got YouTube and video, right? WordPress and publishing, which we use. Etsy and crafts, Spotify and music. You can go on forever here. So here's my bet. Wait for it. Oh, back. The next scale layer, the one that thrives with size, is going to be business systems or business software. I include everything from Square to Booker and Shopkeep, two companies that I was on a panel with earlier today. So why this is happening, the most important innovation in business over the last, say, decade is undoubtedly the cloud. And for our intents and purposes today, the cloud has reshaped business systems in three critical ways. It has made business software ubiquitous, integrated, and networked. So let me walk you through those. First, ubiquitous. Square's main innovation was the ability to expand a product from probably about 50% of a market to nearly 100%. The ability to put software in the hands of the overwhelming majority of businesses, using the cloud and using some of the advantages it provides. Some research here, by 2020, the number of point-of-sale terminals is going to double. So quickly, integration. Now this is really big because it's not just about having each business use software, right? It's also making sure that software each business uses can speak with one another, so that our accounting can speak with our point of sale, which can speak to our marketing. More and more, this sort of constellation of business services, right? Constellation of business software has started to consolidate. And we've seen this already in the marketing industry, where the companies I was up here early with are starting to use payment and inventory data to inform marketing decisions, thus lowering the cost for small businesses to adapt more technologically advanced marketing programs. Three, and by far the most important, networked. By its nature, the structure of the cloud is collaborative, right? Each business shares a space on a server and runs the same piece of software, just under different accounts. That means that every Square customer, for instance, is already networked with each other. Square, earlier this week, said they were the third largest retailer in the US. But we just don't know it because they're not calling themselves a retailer. For the most part, these networks kind of remain nascent, right? Meaning that these companies have not built products to take advantage of that asset yet. But do not be mistaken, it's going to happen. So I only have about 3 minutes left here, but I want to run through a couple applications that we might see. Okay. So let's start with capital. Capital is something that I'm sure all of us, maybe not the folks who work at Google, but all of us are thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So this is research from Fannie and Freddie that shows it's just been getting harder for small businesses to find capital to grow their business. 1995, half of the loans made to businesses were to small businesses. Now it's just above a quarter. So let's ask why. Part of the problem is that banks have trouble understanding and identifying the right businesses in which to invest. That's why Square came out with Square Capital recently, right? In which the company looks over its entire operational network and identifies growing companies that could use a $10,000 loan. First, they have a large enough network to make this a meaningful business, right? But it also takes advantage of an integrated product. They're using operational data to solve capital problems. But it's also a network problem, right? Because every business is networked, they can see these data in real time and avoid the cost with auditing 1,000 different businesses. Ooh, running out here. This is the biggest one by far. There's going to be some big businesses built here. So when we think about scale, we often think about the marginal cost of producing a product, right? Which essentially, how much does it take to produce N+1 of a product? With modern manufacturing, that typically means buying in bulk is better. It's cheaper to make and thus buy 1,000 sugar packets than just 100. But in many ways, scale is just an information problem, right? right? Which is to say, often there may be multiple businesses within the same area that are buying the same product. Maybe it's milk for coffee shops. You might have 5 or 6 coffee shops in an area that are buying the same product but not getting the discount they deserve because they're not networked. It's a nascent network. And that's an information problem. But what if all of these coffee shops could coordinate their purchases and buy at scale, sharing the benefits? And that's what's possible here. We've seen co-ops and other group buying projects emerge. But there's always been that friction in coordinating these purchases. However, connectivity, a ubiquitous, integrated, and network business software can solve this problem. If enough businesses are running on the same network, a single algorithm can identify when the critical mass of participants are running low in the same SKU, right? And they can insert the order programmatically. So I'm just about out of time here, but there's a number of other examples. We can talk about brand, we can talk about labor. But basically what this comes down to is this. What I want everyone to come away with is 3 main points. First, big brand is not inevitable. That era in which the bigger the brand, the better, is going to come to an end. 2, ubiquitous, integrated, and networked business software will fundamentally alter the dynamics that govern the way businesses sell products and consumers buy them in the real world. And 3, the result will be that retail, food service, and generally local marketplaces, in which will follow the path of media and other businesses, in which the scale will come through a much less visible part of the business. If we think about a business as an iceberg, right, in which the brand is sort of the 10% that comes above the water, more and more that scale is going to happen beyond the consumer's eye. It'll appear as if there's hundreds of thousands of completely unrelated businesses, although there'll be a piece of software that will connect them all. So what I'm hoping is that we're going to, instead of this, we're going to see more of this. So that's the presentation. Please come up, talk to me about this. I think it's an important idea. Thank you very much.